So, welcome back. We had a great tea break. Up to your expectations. We are moving to the second plenary. Again, second plenary, day one of the Global Development Conference. This plenary is titled Environmental Policy, Governance and Implementation. It will be chaired by Sonny Domingo, who's a senior research fellow at the Philippine Institute for Development Studies, PIDS. On the panel, we have a colleague of Sonny, so Jean-Clarice Carlos, Program Development Officer at the Philippines Institute for Development Studies. We then have Elena Lazos Javero, who's a professor and a researcher at the Autonomous University of Mexico in the Institute of Social Studies. Then we have on the stage also Ed Bogan, who's Director of Policy Innovation of the Policy Innovation Hub at Griffith University in Australia. And then we have two people joining us online. Thanks for turning your... Hi, Marianne. Thanks for turning on your video. So we have Marianne Ketunen, who's a Policy and Institutional Operations Lead at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. Thank you for connecting at what I imagine is an odd hour for you.
It's midnight here in the UK, so hello to Fiji.
And then we have David Jose Vivas Eugui, who's the Chief of Section, Trade, Environment, Climate Change and Sustainable Development at the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, UNCTAD. Welcome to David as well. And I'll just leave the floor to Sonny. Enjoy this session.
Thank you, Francesco. Okay, I think Christian earlier set a high bar in terms of moderating our plenaries, but he also presented that plenary in a very informal manner. I was thinking of a more traditional approach, having your usual Q&A, both from the moderator and our panel members, but I think right now we'll change that format and follow Christian's lead. This session is all about policy, governance, and implementation. I think earlier it was supposed to be about principles, concepts on climate resilience. But as you are witness, there's no such thing as a definite or concrete line, no? Because talking about resilience means talking about foundations, talking about policy, talking about practical grounding. So maybe the difference right now in this plenary would be us being more specific when it comes to actual practical grounding of policy related to climate resilience. This may include us talking about specific cases within our communities. It may cover as well us talking about strategies toward resilience. But also, as I've talked to our resource speakers earlier, the mere mention of resilience is also a very big question, because how do we frame resilience in terms of definition and in terms of practical grounding? So I guess later on you'll be asked to manifest your questions, and probably you'll be asking the same. So let's start. I am joined today with esteemed resource speakers who's going to talk about how we ground policy, how we interpret policy when it comes to us interfacing with our stakeholders. And in so many cases, the communities surrounding us. And also in some cases, with our indigenous brothers helping out and being recipient of our interventions. I'm not going to expound more on the qualifications of our esteemed members here. And well, that's because everything is on the website of GDN. You can read there the extensive qualifications of our resource speakers. But I'll ask them as well to briefly introduce themselves before giving their specific manifestations. In the order presented on your program, I have Jean here as first presenter, but also, as we have agreed earlier, I think Ed can break the ground in this plenary. So I'll ask Ed to start with his presentation. Ed, please.
Thank you very much. I'm going to break new ground as well by having some PowerPoint slides. because I'm an academic and it's compulsory. But hopefully they're not too awful. So just while those are being set up, I'll introduce myself. I'm Dr. Ed Morgan. I work at Griffith University. I'm a research fellow there, based in Brisbane in Australia. And Griffith University does a lot of applied research focused on sustainability and social justice. And my research is really around environmental and climate change policy, governance and planning. And I'm really interested in how we improve decision-making broadly to address the biodiversity and climate crises, acknowledging that we need to address both at the same time. They are both equally pressing. And if we don't address both, we fail at either. And I'm particularly interested in community level and bottom-up governance and planning, and how we harness strengths already in the community and translate that up into policy. Can I have my slides? I mean, I can do it without, but then I keep referring to them. It becomes a bit meaningless. So what I really want to do is just discuss a few examples from work we've done, and I'll acknowledge multiple colleagues. I work with ecologists, I work with economists, and many others. And the first case study I want to talk about briefly is the Kayapo territory in the Amazon, which, oh, this is always fun. Is it going to go? Oh, there we go. So the Kayapo territory is the green triangle you can see in the picture on the left, surrounded there by deforestation fires. And the Kayapo have managed to protect about 10 million hectares of pristine forest in the Amazon, surrounded by massive deforestation, logging, mining, and agriculture. And the picture on the right, the map on the right, is actually a GIS analysis demonstrating how they have made, or that they have maintained their ecosystem, the ecosystem integrity of their forest. And you can actually see the border of their territory pretty much by what has gone on around it. And so we worked with the International Conservation Fund of Canada, who had worked with the Kayapo for decades now. And they gave us the challenge and said, well, why has it worked? Why have they managed to protect 10 million hectares? And there are a few key things that we went and tried to uncover. And first of all, it was genuine partnerships, between conservation NGOs built on actual genuine respect and trust. And that hadn't come easily, and it hadn't come slowly. It hadn't come quickly. It had come very slowly. And part of the key to building that was that the Kayapo had been encouraged and supported to set up their own NGOs, and they acted as a translator and a buffer between the Kayapo themselves, an indigenous community, and the Western bureaucracy, particularly around setting up payments for ecosystem services. So they sell Brazil nuts and they run ecotourism ventures. The other key point was that the Kayapo had maintained significant power and led decision-making, particularly at a high level, less so perhaps on the day-to-day. And all of this had helped them support retaining a strong culture, which is always a challenge and remains a challenge. And so this approach actually improved and strengthened what was already there, rather than trying to create something new. And a final essential part, which was related to that, was that the whole partnership included territorial integrity within the planning and territorial protection. And that included a series of guard posts. They built guard posts manned by the Kayapo to protect their integrity. And this created, it maintained their territorial integrity and created some justice, some element of justice in that place at times when the Bolsonaro government was in place and the indigenous people were really struggling. The second one I want to talk about is REDD+ development in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and we work with the Woodswell Research Center from the US, who had been working there over 10 years as well. And it's a very challenging political and governance context, as you may know. But what this taught us was that actually you can build governance at a local level. And we actually conducted a governance evaluation, participatory one, asking those involved in RED+, so the community and the NGOs, how's it going? And we measured a range of different measures of governance. And the one on the left is from one where the RED+ had started only that year. And the one on the right is where the RED+ activities has been going on nearly 5 or 6 years. And you can see, just very simply, don't worry about the details, there are more green ratings. Governance had actually improved. And what was key to this was leadership and continuity. So the same group had been there for nearly a decade. And that it wasn't only about carbon. So they built a school, they built wells, they did agricultural extension and training. And that was a fundamental part of building trust with the community. The last example I just briefly talk about is one that's ongoing in the Papua New Guinea. And we're working with a group there. It's a for-profit organization, but it's locally run, locally led, set up in New Ireland to build a blue carbon project. And bringing the community on board has been absolutely fundamental and a real challenge. And it is only because it's a local group that can do it. And we, do very little in that area. We just try and help with technical support. And the livelihood component is key. So it can't just be about telling people protect your mangroves. Other livelihood options have to be as part of a whole package and integrated approach. But again, what we've noticed is there's strong customary traditions, customary governance, what I would call customary governance and planning. And we think the aim now is to build on that, to turn it into a blue carbon scheme that is suitable for a big international voluntary or government-led scheme. And so what we've tried to do is sort of try to work out, well, what lessons can we learn? What can we bring together? And we feel that there are 3 key things from these case studies. One is ecosystem integrity, and that is the why. Why do we do this at all? Well, we're trying to protect ecosystem integrity and the related ecosystem services that come with it. The second is effective governance, good governance. And that's about how. How do we make decisions? Who's involved in those decisions? And then finally, the last part is planning. And I think that sometimes goes missing. And planning is really about the what and the why. I'm sorry, the what and the where. What decisions are we going to make? Who's involved? What are we going to protect and what are we not? And what we're very interested in and what we've tried to develop is doing genuinely participatory, genuinely bottom-up evaluations of these 3. And the goal of that is to say, actually, can we demonstrate up? Can we show international finance or even local government finance or whoever that actually these governance, this planning, this ecosystem integrity is in place? And therefore, instead of having these top-down payments for ecosystem services, carbon finance is very much, you do this and we might give you some money. You fit to us. We want to flip that on its head and say, no, we are doing, or these indigenous communities are doing good things. These communities are doing good things. We can demonstrate that to you. Now you give us money, rather than fitting to a million different schemes. And we see a starting point where I think that's quite a long-term goal because it's changing international finance, which is never going to be easy. But we see a starting point at a more local scale. And we're very interested in how we bargain or allow communities to bargain among themselves. So in a ridge to reef approach, obviously very common in the Pacific, and where a lot of our work has been focused, is if there is an ecotourism venture at the bottom of the, taking rich, wealthy tourists scuba diving on a beautiful reef, can a community upstream negotiate benefits from that by saying, well, we're not going to chop down our trees. We could sell our trees for logging and make lots of money. Thank you very much. We're not going to do that. You down there will benefit from that. And let's share in those benefits. And those benefits don't have to be cash. They might be employment. They might be goods and services. They can be a lot of other things. And we're trying to apply a more basket of benefits approach is what we call it, that says there are multiple benefits here. Can we harness relatively simply strengthen existing governance and planning to then allow the communities, empower them to choose which they harness, because I believe that they will largely harness the sustainable ones and not the unsustainable ones. And that is essential for if we're going to address climate change and biodiversity.
Oh, thank you very much, Ed. So Ed is the director of Griffith's Policy Innovation Hub. And I think right now the direction in terms of innovating when it comes to climate-related resilience is us going subnationally, going to our communities, going to the local level, may it be in terms of governance or community participation. I think I'll take the lead of Christian and ask you one big question before I go to the next speaker. Probably from my end, the big question is, you mentioned that governance at the local level can be built up. So I think the natural question there is, why aren't we seeing much more of that bottom-up empowerment?
A great question. I think I want to be very flippant and say, because it's a bunch of white colonialists in charge, recognizing that I am one of them, unfortunately. But I think it is the power sits at the top, the power and resources sit at the top. And and I think it's related to capitalism as well. It is this top down, we have the resources, we will give you the resources, but only in telling you what to do. As opposed to trusting, and it is about trust, and governance often comes back to trust, trusting people to make the right decisions and do the right thing if you give them the resources and allow them to do it. And I think that's difficult for government, and I understand it's difficult for government, and I don't necessarily criticize government for taking a top-down approach. But I do think it is embedded within policy, politics, and economics particularly.
All right. So empowerment requires resources.
Absolutely. And not, yes, and resources in a very broad sense of the term. So with the earlier, Paul talked about confidence, right? Absolutely. Communities need to have confidence to make decisions.
Okay.
But what I find interesting everywhere I go is that, you know, they are making decisions all the time. I talk about planning and I'm not talking about glossy documents and urban planning and all of this sort of very detailed technocratic nonsense, even though that's what I study. People make decisions about the future all the time, collectively within communities. That's planning. That is what I would call planning. We simply have to allow them to demonstrate that they have that, I think.
So I guess innovating right now requires us moving forward in terms of the human capital element, empowering our human capital.
Yes, I think so. And I think a role of universities and NGOs who are already doing it, but I think universities increasingly, because they're anchor institutions, they exist and they've existed a long time, often playing a role in translating for the community, not telling the community what they don't know, not being the senior person who goes, as we talked about in the first panel, right, suiting up and going, oh, I know everything. No, I know very little about your place. You know about your place. Let me help you translate that into the global world that unfortunately is where all the money is.
Thank you, Ed. We'll ask you later on during the Q&A for more answers. I now go to Jean Clarice for her manifestation. Jean, please.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Sunny. So my name is Jean Clarice Carlos. So I'm a project development officer from the Philippine Institute for Development Studies, and I'm also a senior lecturer at the Institute of Global Affairs and Diplomacy in Miriam College. So first of all, I would like to thank the Global Development Network of the Government of Fiji and the University of South Pacific for this incredible opportunity to be part of this panel on environmental policy, governance, and implementation. So what I bring to this panel is the gender lens. So I will kickstart the conversation about gender. So a perspective I have been consistently applied throughout my 12-year career across various sectors, whether financial inclusion, digital economy, migration, MSMEs, geopolitics, and others. So regardless of the issue at hand, I have always analyzed policies, practices, and systems using gender and intersectionality frameworks. So intersectionality is a concept developed by Kimberly Crenshaw in 1989. This examines how overlapping social identities such as gender, age, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, geographic location, and even visa status and other factors interact to create unique experiences of privilege or marginalization. This framework is especially vital when discussing environmental policy and governance because systematic inequalities often compound the vulnerabilities of the marginalized groups. For instance, in environmental disaster scenarios, women are often at greater risk of gender-based violence due to pre-existing inequalities exacerbated by crisis. Cultural stereotypes, such as framing women primarily as caregivers, further restrict their access to critical resources, leadership roles, and decision-making spaces. By adopting an intersectionality lens, we ensure that policies address root causes of inequality and provide inclusive, equitable solutions that empower vulnerable populations while fostering resilience. So in the early stages of my career, and I engaged both academically and voluntarily in addressing environmental challenges, often through a gender-sensitive approach. Let me share a few examples in the Philippines. So the first case I worked on was in 2013. So I lived in the community for 6 months. It's in the Bohol watershed conservation. So I worked with the local government of the municipalities of Alicia and Kandihay in developing school-based youth projects on conserving a critical watershed in Bohol, focusing on how water scarcity impacted their communities as a fresh graduate back in 2013. So we incorporated gender sensitivity training in the project, recognizing the roles of women not only in reproductive and productive roles, but also in the community. So this is with the NGO called VSO International. So my second case study would be the small-scale mining in Camarines Norte back in 2015. So my work examined the impacts of small-scale mining on local communities, particularly on the women who often bore the brunt of environmental degradation through health risks and loss of livelihoods. So as a young academic back in 2015, I stayed in community for 6 months, mapping the role of women in the male-dominated sector of small-scale mining. This was with the University of the Philippines, Diliman. So later on, I will expound more on these cases. So the third case I will be discussed throughout my speech is the women in the informal tourism sector in the Boracay Island. I published this paper back in 2013 with the Philippine Institute for Development Studies. So I studied the informal tourism sector in Boracay, focusing on how women workers, often in the precarious roles, were proportionately affected by environmental regulations and closures aimed at addressing sustainability. So each of these experiences underscore the importance of incorporating gender perspectives into environmental policy and governance. When we ignore intersectionality, we risk creating policies that fail to address the structural barriers faced by marginalized groups, rendering them ineffective or even harmful. So as we discuss policy and implementation, it is critical to ask ourselves, whose voices are being heard in decision-making process? Who benefits from the policies and who is left behind? Lastly, how do policies address or fail to address deep-rooted inequalities that affect participation, resource distribution, and resilience? So by embedding intersectionality into environmental governance, we can move toward the sustainable, inclusive, and effective solutions. This means not only empowering marginalized groups to participate in the decision-making, but also recognizing their unique contributions to resilience and sustainability. So let me go through individual points per case study. So for the Karaod watershed management, so there is this Karaod Watershed Model Forest Management Council is a leading example of a community-led adaptation model. So it was established back in 2003 by an executive order from the governor of Bohol. It unites 7 municipalities, national agencies, NGOs, universities, and local communities to sustainably manage the watershed. So the second one is the Camarines Norte small-scale mining. So in Camarines Norte, small-scale mining offers both economic opportunities and environmental challenges. Policies and initiatives aim to balance economic benefits with sustainability and safety. So for community-led initiative, there are two. So the first one is the artisanal and small-scale gold mining work roadmap that promotes responsible mining practices, mercury reduction, and elimination of child labor. This is in partnership with an NGO called Planet Gold Philippines, and introduce a safer techniques, mining techniques, and community-based environmental monitoring. The second community-based initiative is the Green Mining Projects. So these initiatives emphasize mercury-free methods, environmental protection, and stakeholder involvement. So for the third case study of the Boracay Restoration Island is a benchmark on how policies, community initiatives, and environmental projects can synergize and tackle ecological degradation. So there are several national government policies, but I will focus on community initiatives such as campaigns like Project Pristine and High Five Boracay, which actively engage locals and tourism cleanups and promoted sustainable tourism practices. With those, so I will now go through the lived experiences of women on the ground. So across various contexts, we see recurring questions. So I've mentioned earlier whose voices are heard in decision making, who benefits from policies, and who are left behind. So my experiences working with empowered elected councillor demonstrated the value of inclusive leadership. However, cases like small-scale mining, tourism, and watershed has gaps, and there are also opportunities for fostering inclusivity, particularly for women. So for just let me go through quickly. So for the small-scale mining in Camarines Norte, the dominant participants in the decision-making processes include government agencies like the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, local officials, mining associations, occasionally NGOs. So the marginalized groups such as individual miners, indigenous peoples, women, and children are often left out or tokenized. Despite their direct experiences with mining impacts, they lack meaningful representation, and decision making remains top down. So I'm just echoing the presentation of my colleague here. So for the watershed, women play vital roles in community resources management and livelihood support. Yet traditional gender norms and time poverty often exclude them from formal decision-making structures like the Karaod Watershed Model Forest Management Council. Barriers such as caregiving responsibilities and cultural perceptions of leadership as male-dominated field prevent their active participation. Lastly, for the Boracay restoration, so national agencies like the Department of Environment and Natural Resources and the Boracay Interagency Task Force dominate decision-making, often sidelining communities. So the Ati indigenous community and the small fisher folk are particularly underrepresented, while large tourism operators hold disproportionate influence. So women's voices, although prominent in grassroots advocacy, are often absent from the formal processes. So Sir Sonny, that's all.
All right, thank you very much, Jean. Jean is a colleague of mine, so she's quite familiar with what I'm doing with PIDS, and I'm also a bit familiar with the unit Jean is involved in. And the difference is, in my case, I've been focusing on ecological integrity related policy. In Jean's case, she's been around. So venturing into ecological integrity policy, and I think much more in terms of regional interfaces, the Philippines, and how we relate to our neighbors. So I guess Jean's manifestation earlier focused much on gender-related concerns. And earlier, I think, if I recall correctly, the president of GDN mentioned that we have right now parity in terms of participation in this conference. I think our wish would be to have that parity in terms of participation down the line, not only within the national level, but also at the subnational level within our communities. My question, Jean, would be, well, you've mentioned a lot, no? Also mentioning the path towards us redeeming ourselves in terms of more gender-related participation. But right now, if you're going to pick one concern, what is the biggest barrier in terms of us having that similar parity at the national and subnational levels?
I think this is like in all the sectors I talk gender on. So like the primary, like I've been around different international conferences. So the problem of the global south is really different from the problems of the north. So for the global south, we are still experiencing the typical gender stereotypes. Women are still bounded to traditional roles, and also that prevents them in joining the decision-making policy. So women live this experience, especially, for example, if we use the framework intersectionality-based policy analysis, so women are often bearing the brunt of all these climate issues because they're managing the water in the household, how they will feed their families and all. So especially if you couple it when their experiences climate disasters while living in a conflict-affected areas, women typically being left at home, bearing the caregiving sector, so they cannot participate in the productive, which is they cannot earn income because they're focusing at home. At the same time, while worrying about that, they cannot also participate in the community processes such as consultations because they're bounded in their household. So I think in the global south, I think that is the main barrier for women to participate in the policies, in participating in crafting bottom-up policies. So yeah, that's it. So it's a different conversation with the global north.
Yeah, probably black and white in terms of contrast. So it's all about giving the platform for gender-related participation.
Yes, I also do a lot of work with ASEAN and APEC. So as Dr. Sonny mentioned, because I handle the networks of the PIDS. So I recently attended the APEC Seniors Officials Meeting in Peru back in August. So surprisingly, this is a really great development. Before, APEC was only talking about trade and investment, trade liberalization, but surprisingly, across the 3 weeks of the seniors official meetings, there are numerous gender platforms like gender discussions and gender conferences. So I was lucky to attend, like there is a tourism working group which focuses on the involvement of women from APEC countries in the tourism sector. And there's also women in AI. They also discuss that. And also in the environment. So the technical working group on environment also has like platforms for women to talk about this. So I think the APEC and ASEAN as platforms are really great conversation to gather women to talk about these gender issues, because like climate and gender issues are cross-border. It's not confined in one country. So we all experience gender-based violence. We all experience the climate change and other effects. So I think international platforms, regional forums are great spaces to talk about both issues that are both cross boundaries.
Thank you, Jean. Thank you. So I guess aside from the traditional gender-related issues, we have right now contemporary concerns, gender-related wise. We'll have more time with you, Jean, later on. So now I go to Elena. Elena, please, for your manifestation.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much for the organizers for all their work and energy, and thank you for the invitation. I will be focusing in 3 cases in Mexico and only talking a little bit about India as examples that have been exploring these strategies and alternatives more than to climate resilience, I would say, to reduce uncertainties and vulnerabilities faced to climate change and market prices. Because if we really don't relate climate change with the market power and the market infrastructure, we are not dealing really with climate change from my point of view. The first example, I will say, it is about indigenous communities in Mexico that have been little by little recovering their agrobiodiversity as a way to reduce vulnerabilities faced to climate change and trying to establish a more just food system. And I am talking about food system because it is the participation of the food system in the climate change is very important. It's more or less between 40 and 50% of the emissions will be due to the way that we are producing our food. So I think that more and more food systems are coming into the climate change discourses. So this first case, it is multi-stakeholder engagement involving recovering their agrobiodiversity, but it doesn't mean that it is, a good governance. We can talk about multi-stakeholders, but we have always to consider the power structure and who is deciding and what is decided and in which moment are they deciding. So even though there are a lot of peasants and indigenous smallholders producing their agrobiodiversity, and this has been the result of social movements, they have been fighting more than 15, 20 years for their legitimacy of their food systems. And after these 15, 20 years of a social big movement, that it is called Sin Maíz no hay país. This is without corn, we don't have a country, where more or less 80, 90 rural organizations took part of it. But we could say, no, they are winning now because now there is an agroecological and agrobiodiversity program stated by the government. So we could say, no, now there are good policies about this agroecological section. But what we have to consider is now the private sector. This is not only the local food industry, but more the international food industry that are co-opting this agrobiodiversity. They are buying the maize land races and beans diversity for exportation, and they are transforming it into a gourmet cuisine. And now, more and more, the consumers are willing to pay more. But what about the majority of the Mexicans? What about the urban poor dwellers? Are they able to eat all this agrobiodiversity and all these maize land races? So even though we can see and we can analyze these policies and as an integration of indigenous knowledge systems and scientific knowledge, because there are no genetic scientists that they are experimented with a lot of varieties, crop rotation, crop association, that there are environmental traps for insects, pests, the recovery of the soil and better water management. And there has been a community integrations in the sense of seeds exchange, family networks in the seed exchange. They are talking even about seed banks, that we have to be careful about it. Better talk about seed networks as in India and not seed banks as in Mexico. But so these systems have been reducing these environmental vulnerabilities faced to climate change. And also, it has been given a better nutritious food, But here we have to be pointing out what happens with the governments. And we have a very delicate governance arrangements that are ruled by the markets and by the prices. So we have better prices that have been brought an interest in conserving their agrobiodiversity, but the farmers are answering in a very individual way. This is even as competitors, So they don't help each other in this conservation of agrobiodiversity. So there are a lot of controversies when we are analyzing the policy making, even of a good agroecological, or that it's maintaining the agrobiodiversity, when we are not considering the market structure and the market forces. So the gourmetization of traditional food, that consumers are paying more and more. So they are letting out of the equation food justice, as poor consumers are more and more marginalized. And only some points to bring into the discussion about the case in India that I get to know in Andhra Pradesh, this agroecological program, that even though they have received a lot of critics, because of their hierarchical approach and because of using women as a promoter, as the very local and family level, without being paid. But the governance there, it's more relying on social ties, on social prestige of conserving, of community and family networks, of seed cooperatives. They are not talking about seed banks. And also they are very much focused in the nutritious aspects that have been quite underlined. So what we are considering like policies, and well, this Andhra Pradesh agroecological program is a big policy in India. So what we have to consider is, well, are they coming from top down, or bottom up? But I think that's not anymore the question. I think that the question will be more who will be deciding in the sense of the market ties, that they are always depending on the market. As Red Plus, for example, they're deciding on the market, no? And so we don't have to really say, now it is like a big success or a big failure, because we have to see how the market is behaving and which are like the consequences for these social ties or these social networks. And for the second case, also, I will be focusing on the food systems, but more in the livestock production, also in Mexico. And there is a program that also comes from, there's a policy that it is fostering the silvopastoral systems, no, as intensive in their management to leave out patches of rainforest, and their goal is to restore biodiversity. So they have intensive parcel management with small plots, with electric fences or living fences, intensive labor, no, integration of forest and grasses that they are dealing as pest barriers. They are recovering and maintaining water resources, no, forest patches or forest corridors, no, to really try to maintain or to bring the biodiversity, no. But here the problem it is, well, the young generation is not more interested in that. So how can we really bring the interest of young generations into these innovative systems that could be, no, that demands a lot of creativity, and that could be, they could be integrated, but that we now feel that they are rejecting everything that has to do with the rural farming. So if we need a political program that could focus on this environmental diversification, no, and that they are giving better prices for the cattle that is like sustainable cattle, what we have to also deal with, it's the challenges. First, the growth of the cattle industrial production, that it's the big menace in the sense of they are co-opting all this agro-silvopastoral production. They are polluters of water, of air, they are demanding homogeneous genetic lines, no? And almost everything is for exportation. So what we are now dealing it is with these geopolitical challenges, no, that we are exporting meat to the Arab Emirates, to China, that we have all these Canadian pig enterprises controlling all the process, no, of the pork industry in Mexico. And what we have, it is all these environmental consequences for the exportation. So when we are dealing with, okay, there is a big policy about these agro-silvopastoral systems that everybody was excited about it because, well, they are restoring biodiversity and water and corridors and rainforest corridors. Yes, but if we have to deal and we have to compete with the big industrial meat industry, then it is when it has a lot of questioning and really a lot of challenges. And the last case, it was these agroforestry coffee systems that also there has been a lot of questioning, and I think it's also a very global problem. If we have a coffee production under canopies, no, of these agroforestry systems, well, you know that it can be like 20, 25 different or diversified products, no, that they control the pests, that we have been having to deal with the rust plague, but we have a diversity of production, we have better soils, health for everybody, rich food, no, reinforcing traditional cuisine. So we have a lot of pros, no, or advantages. Also, no, it's a multi-stakeholder fallow strategy, no, where we have the farmers, smallholders, we have cooperatives that they have been selling the coffee in a better organized way, but the big menace again are the big companies, and in this case is Nestlé, pushing, no, to monoculture coffee production without shade that could provide frost plague, and the coffee beans could be very little, no, for the European market. So then there is a big pressure, no, to convert all these agro-silvopastoral agroforestry systems of coffee into monoculture of coffee because of the market. So what we have here, it is unequal governance. No, farmers are not deciding when or to whom they could sell their product, depending on the big coffee transnationals. How then to open local markets or regional markets? That's the big challenge. And that's a big challenge to climate change, to keep their forestry systems, but also to have benefits from their own productions. So in these examples, we have this partial successful story, but very controversial, and that they are really with a very unbalanced governance system and very fragile, with a lot of fragility and uncertainties, with ups and downs, sometimes too much in the downslide, just to declare it almost as failure, but then again going up. So we have to see it always as a process that it is like a roller coaster sometimes, that we have to see that sometimes they are very much in danger of losing everything, all these smallholders with all these vulnerabilities, and in some moments, they are full of energy that keep us going, and that they are bridging, these political forces, these institutions, and they are trying, to really convert themselves into a new paradigm, and really to have the flag of social environmental justice or climate justice or territorial justice. And with this, I finish. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lena. That was, I think, quite comprehensive. But going back to your articulations, I think you're the first one who mentioned something about food systems. And if you talk about food systems, you talk about food security. And probably that trumps everything in our agenda, right? Because you go down to our communities, their main concern really is survival for those below the poverty line. And you've mentioned so many clashing interests, not only at the community level, but also up there among our decision makers. So probably my biggest question would be, how do we go forward with less chaos? Is it possible for us to go forward in a rational, less chaotic way?
Yeah.
Please, Elena.
Well, I think there are some strategies that are functioning that are more at the local markets, and that we have to be focusing very much like this circular economy or this solidarity economy, and in this sense, how to construct it, because it's we can say it easily, but it's full of challenges, and full of challenges because they can be very much in that local markets, and to say yes, our food can be really having or trying to construct this food sovereignty in the sense of more regional way, but and they are trying, but they are full of challenges that we have to really consider that we that our governments, it's not only to have good policies as agroecological policies, but they have to really deal with the lobbying of the big companies, because if they afterwards say, okay, Nestlé can come and can do whatever they want, okay, then of course they break the local markets, so our governments have to deal with stopping all these big companies, with these big transnationals, and saying, okay, yes, the investment is very important, but first there has to be an environmental regulation, and second there have to be social and economical change, not to be like they have all the world for them,
So stronger political will. Well, Elena is both a professor and researcher from Mexico. And if we're going back earlier to our informal discussion, she has a lot on her mind, and probably the whole day won't be enough for those less traditional manifestations. So we'll have more questions for you later on, Elena. Thank you for that. So I go to our next resource person, our speaker. Vivas. Vivas is joining us online, as mentioned earlier by Francesco. Vivas, please, for your manifestations.
Thank you. First, to thank the invitation for this wonderful conference. It's a pleasure to be there. Mr. Chair, one question. I have a presentation in PowerPoint, but also have a short video where you see the stakeholders speaking, not me. So I would like, if you don't mind, show the PowerPoint and then show a short video if I'm allowed.
Yes, please. Start with your presentation.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. I will. I'm trying to share, but I need to get a permission for sharing the presentation. Okay. 1 second. Okay, let me go. 1 second. Sorry, I need to go to the PowerPoint. You tell me if you can see the PowerPoint, and I'll
Yes,
continue.
all good here, Vipas.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir. I will present a case. I will bring you from the Pacific to the Caribbean on a case that we have developed vertically and horizontally on promoting sustainable use. I'm going to bring you to the marine environment. This is not a terrestrial case. And basically, we develop an approach together with local communities for the full implementation of the Convention on Biological Diversity, Nagoya Protocol, CITES, as well as trade-related agreements. My name is David. I work for the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, and we are going to see how these frameworks are applied at the local level through a set of principles and criteria developed by UNTAC together with stakeholders and enabling sustainable use locally. The next slide. Basically, the concept of blue biotrade came in the first Ocean Conference 2017, and we saw a merging of the biotrade program where there is a set of biotrade principles developed in the World Summit Sustainable Development last century, defining as a way to support local businesses and businesses in undertaking sustainable use of biological and genetic resources. We also have in UNTAC a fisheries and ocean economy project, so we decided to merge both and apply an approach that will imply the implementation of SDG 14, SDG 15, and 12 at the same time. For this joint effort, it was launched by UNTAC, the Development Bank of Latin America, the CITES Secretariat, and International Oceans Institute, including NGOs, financial entities, and also scientific and academic bodies. Now, what is biotrade? So it's simple for everybody. It's basically the process of harvesting, catching, cultivating different marine species, from seaweed to mollusks to fish. We're focusing very much on this stage on queen conch and seaweed, to transform them and commercialize them in form of products derived from marine and coastal biodiversity under 3 pillar criteria that we all know very well: environmental, social, and economic. Now, the principles of blue biotrade or biotrade, depending on when you want to apply them, are 7, and they are backed by a series of criteria that are applied to the businesses, to local business association communities wanting to engage in sustainable use. And the 3 basic principles come from the CBD: conservation, sustainable use, and fair and equitable benefit sharing. But you have other elements to make it sustainable from other angles. Socio-economic aspects are considered, legal compliance with conventions, national regulations, especially in the sea with the Convention of the Law of the Sea, the Fish Stocks Agreement, FAO relevant soft law, but also with CITES and CBD decisions. We consider respect of rights of all actors, including traditional knowledge and practices being applied in a particular case. And we always try to define clarity on the right to use and access of natural resources by local communities. And this is very important. In land, it refers to land and pre-historical and pre-constitutional rights. But in the case of the ocean, our historical right of possession, it's very much more difficult to do the limitation, but the fishers and the coastal communities have been there even before any state was present. So basically, it's prehistorical rights. There are two publications there that you can download with the QR reader with the principles and criteria and the blue biotrade approach. But now I'm going to give you an example to make it more real. And we're going to talk today about a specific mollusk. It's called queen conch. The species called Strombus gaius. It's found in the entire Caribbean. It's a species with a regional life cycle. So it moves all over Caribbean in their entire life. It's not static, and it has a reproduction, birth, reproduction, the circle that it's always moving around the Caribbean. But it's a species that is of high value, but we can only extract it in very low volumes because it's a cited appendix to listed species. So it's regulated trade. So the same species is used for many purposes. So we can use 100% of the species when we are allowed to harvest it and commercialize it, including the meat, the trimmings. The meat is used for culinary arts, is very well known in the Caribbean, and also a delicacy. Conch trimmings are used for beds and fertilizer. The shells are used for handicraft instruments. There are many that are interested in the species, so there are a lot of ecotourism, non-intrusive. There is a lot of research and development in genes and biochemicals to replicate the life cycle, but very interestingly, it produces pearls, the only pink pearls naturally coming, and they are so valuable that one pearl costs above $100,000, just one. So it's a very, 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 again, high value, low volume. So it is to really manage the low volume to ensure high value for local communities. All the process is done by local communities. Let's go next. The total value of this species in the international market, according to ONTAC and CITES statistics, is about $74 million annually, and most of the production comes from the Caribbean, from the Yucatan Peninsula to the Eastern Caribbean. I'll go there. Then here you have the partners, and we implemented a project with the Organization of East Caribbean States to ensure that we could apply this approach with local communities and ensure that they will control the value chain from the harvesting to the processing before internal trade to tourists, or to exports. Now, to do that, we develop a plan of action together with the stakeholders. Here, there are just some examples of recommendations of the plan of action that we started implementation 3 years ago. And here you can see some examples in environmental, social, and economic aspects. There are many more. The plan of action is very detailed with indicators, criteria, timing, cost, responsible entities, etc. But fundamental aspects in a site is a listed species is you have to do a stock assessment. You need to know the population, you need to know the reproduction rate, how much can you use, when, how, which are the periods of no take, who's going to take it. Basically, the fishing of queen conch is a very special one because it's super selective. You just get conch with certain traps, and it's done by divers. And socially, it's very important because these divers, when we were doing the analysis, were totally unprotected, not insurance, no social security, no training, not certified equipment, non-hyperbolic chamber. So we have to set the entire social network because they were really doing this at their own risk. On the species, we found that in certain areas of the Caribbean is overexploited. Of course, that's why they are in CITES. And in certain areas, it was abundant because we're not features around those islands. They was basically unpopulated, and there was a need to develop a nursery to replenish population in areas where it has been depleted so we can restore ecosystem balances. Finally, we support all the communities to comply with full traceability requirements to telephones, virtual systems, so they could comply with site requirements. So we will have the volumes within quotas, the certification of legal harvesting, permits for export, permits for import for those who decide to do. And basically the main market is local first, second tourists that go into the Caribbean for holidays, and thirdly some of the harvest is exported as for 74 million to high-end markets, including Miami and others, and they pay a very high price for that as a specialty. There are more elements, but I'm just giving you an overview. You will see the stakeholders talking themselves. Now, we have some lessons from this project, that I think are important. The first is that when we're talking about sustainability, we all have goodwill and good aims. But sustainability criteria, you can add as many criteria, principles, requirements as you like, but all that has a cost. And usually the problem in vertical markets is that cost is usually borne by the local communities, not by the exporters, not by the supermarkets, very few times by the consumers, unless you're in fair trade and very certified and specific systems. So if we want to produce sustainably, we need to ensure that the costs are spread along the value chain and are not always paid by the lower part of the value chain. And I think the lady from Mexico will agree on that. It's always the producer that has to bear the cost of sustainability. And this is unfeasible will reduce any interest in engaging in sustainable practices and usually enable illegal actions. When complying with the law is more expensive than not complying with the law, people tend to take the other way. And this is very sad, because if you make the cost of entry too high, then local stakeholders may finally decide to go the other way, and that's not what we want. Second, it's always important to have local ownership. In this case, all the producers are locals. There are some companies establishing processing, but they hire usually the women of the fisher, and it's a very interesting balance there. Usually women even get more money than the fishers. It's interesting in the processing. Another element, especially when you're dealing with CITES listed species and other species, is you need to do the stock assessment. You need to know the populations. You need to know all the scientific data if you want to manage the species. And then you have to have the management system. Now, you cannot protect what you cannot measure. If you don't have the systems to understand the value of the stocks, the ecosystem relations, and the capacity to reproduce at maximum sustainable yield or other baseline points according to the UN Fish Stocks Agreement, then you are in trouble. CITES and CBD principles and obligations should not be disregarded when doing trade. It's important that conservation, sustainable use always goes together with other economic and social indicators. Something that we learned from this process is that we decided that in many of our projects, we are not going to do grants and support without commitment from the countries. In this case, the cost and the support by international organizations, including UNTAC and CITES, imply that countries will have to pay and put the money for the other half. When they do that, they get ownership, responsibility, and they really want to see results. So it's more effective to always do partnerships instead of just unilateral support that may be forgotten as soon as the money is gone. Finally, we need to get awareness raising in the stakeholders group to promote visibility of this type of examples so we can.
So I think we're having a bit of a technical.
If you will listen to it well, so we will go from Fiji, which is a lovely place, been there, and now we're going to St. Vincent's, the Grenadines, Grenada, and St. Lucia.
The iconic sound of the Queen Conch signals many things across the Caribbean. For some, particularly in the OECS territories of Grenada, St. Lucia, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines.
Sorry about that, maybe the Wi-Fi. Sorry, again.
Of opportunity.
You could pay your bills with your family.
My dad, that is what he does up to this day, and send all of us to school, and even grandchildren now is going to school from that industry as well.
In October 2020, the OECS, in collaboration with the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development and CITES, launched the Blue Biotrade Project. It was financed by the European Union through the RIGHT program.
I want to situate this in the context of the OECS Commission's work plan. Our strategic work plan for this triennium includes a strategic objective of reinventing our economy in the context of the devastation to our economies caused by the pandemic and all climate change and all the other crises that we have been assaulted by.
The Blue Biotrade Project aims to empower fishers and small-scale coastal operators from Grenada, St. Lucia, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines to produce and trade Queen Conch responsibly.
We need to understand that in biodiversity, sustainability is important so that those benefiting from the activity or in the activity can continue doing that for generations.
The Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora, popularly known as CITES, provides guidance on the sustainable management of this invaluable resource.
In terms of conch, once you're exporting the meat, you would require a CITES permit from St. Lucia. If you're importing it, you would require a CITES permit from the country of origin.
The three pillars of CITES is to ensure that international trade in CITES listed species is legal, sustainable, and traceable. The information gathered through phase 1 of the Blue Biotrade project is being studied and incorporated into an action plan for the advancement of the queen conch industry. Key to future success is an ongoing stock assessment to determine what corrective measures need to be implemented.
What we're seeing with the fishers that we interviewed so far is that they're having to go deeper and deeper and on longer dives to catch the same amount of conch.
Most times about 80 to 100 feet, but there are places where that you have to go to about 115, 120 feet sometimes.
We know that we have been seeing some degradation in the habitats.
The silt from development on land affects the grass, the seagrass, which they live on.
Presently, the queen conch is also under threat due to issues such as overfishing and climate change. The queen conch is widely regarded as a delicacy, and many believe there is potential to explore new ways of enjoying the seafood regionally and internationally.
Every part of the conch can be used. The shell can be used for ornaments, beads.
It can be used to make carbon neutral cement. It also can be used to make artificial reefs.
I had gone as far as India. They make buttons and necklaces.
In 2020, conch made up 62.7% of St. Vincent's exported fish and fish products.
We ship, as I mentioned, to Dubai.
Our main markets is in the US. We move anywhere from 5 to 10,000 pounds by monthly.
In Miami presently, a pound of conch is $30 US.
We are actually stepping into not unknown territory because for years fisher folk have done their thing, but moving it to a new level of sophistication, a new level of value, and a new level of prosperity.
That's it. Sorry for making it so long, but I think it was more illuminating than whatever I said. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, David. Those were very interesting manifestations and presentation. David is Section Chief from the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. And as JC mentioned earlier, the big guy from UNCTAD. I think from various engagements that I've been to, I've rarely heard manifestations related to the blue biotrade, or on a much larger perspective, the blue economy. In the Philippines, we're just right now crafting our domestic policy on the blue economy. So I think a lot of us here can relate to that, particularly in this case wherein we are in the midst of, well, a coastal municipality or community experiencing so much of the impacts of climate change and disaster risks. So I think my big question for you, David, would be, how can we leverage more, or how can we make this discourse more mainstream? Because we rarely hear articulations related to blue biotrade or even the blue economy. Please, David. Thank you.
Sorry, thank you. I think it's a very relevant question. We started piloting this in the Caribbean, so it's relatively new. We have not yet gone to Asia, and yesterday I had a discussion with the Asian Development Bank in the Philippines to say it's time we start testing this in the Asia-Pacific area. Again, this model is for, again, small communities. It's a very selective, specific type of activity. This is not for the macro sectors. But anyway, we are trying to engage also with other actors like PEMSIA. Amy Gonzalez is a close friend. And the idea is that ONTA can help you from the macro level to the micro level. And I'll explain how. UNCTAD is the only agency that have trade data on all sectors of the blue economy. We have it on all countries, globally aggregated, disaggregated, so we can measure the sector. Second, we have projects at the sectoral level called Ocean Economy Strategies, and we have projects at the micro level called Blue Biotrade to consider the particular elements and particularities of each community. So the first thing, we are intergovernmental organization, will be for the Philippines to write us a letter asking for support in what a specific species, community, and area. And we can use the letter to knock the door at financial institutions to try to find the relative finance. We as an agency don't charge, but we charge for obviously for the cost of the project, but we don't charge as a staff. So all our technical assistance knowledge is provided by free. So we will be happy to go from all the entire Pacific Basin and support you in any way possible. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, David. I think we need more of these localized success stories. May it be us relating to the blue biotrade or from another bigger sectoral perspective. If we have time, I think we'll be asking you more questions later. We now go to our last, but not definitely the least, resource speaker. May I ask Marian for her manifestations? Marian, please.
Yes, thank you, Sonny. And indeed, greetings to Fiji and greetings to everybody online. I do hope that everybody came to this plenary with the idea to get some food for thought, because it really feels like we've gotten quite a lot of food for thought. So it's been a quite wonderful tour to the table of different approaches that can be taken towards increasing climate resilience. And I'm going to add one more to the mix, which is about taking the lens of circular economy into this. So indeed, my name is Marian Kettunen. I'm from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. And for those who don't know Ellen MacArthur Foundation, we are independent, not-for-profit civil society organization working on circular economy. We have the main office in the UK, but we also do have regional offices in North America, Latin America, Europe, and China. So we do have this global approach and lens through which we look at circular economy. And I think in full disclosure as well, I think I'm one of those people who you might call the friend of GDN. So I've been supporting GDN in various capacities over the past years, including I was part of the previous conference, which took place in Quito in Ecuador. And now I've been part of the advisory committee for this conference, so that you also know that I wear that hat as well today. I don't have case studies to share. I'm a policy expert, so I'm going to really take more macro angle to the panel, which I suppose is appropriate being the last speaker of the panel. There's a lot of talk about circular economy, but what there is less talk about is how to position circular economy and circular economy approaches as climate and biodiversity measures, including measures to deliver climate resilience. And my key message with my intervention would be really to encourage you to think and use circular economy, circular approaches to also deliver climate resilience moving forward, because that is effectively what these approaches are and what they do. We just don't really position them that way as of yet. But first and foremost, just to put us all on the same page, what is circular economy and how is it a climate measure? How is it a biodiversity measure? How does it support resilience? Circular economy doesn't have one universal agreed definition, but in general, we are always essentially talking about moving away from the linear make, take, and waste economy to an economy where we retain, where we reuse, recycle, we regenerate, and also restore. So there are quite a lot of R's that are part of circular economy. Which should also put you in the right mindset of thinking that circular economy is not just about recycling, even though that's so far often where the practical applications have been. Circular economy is much more than that. It's much more upstream approach and should be much more upstream approach. And it also is really applicable also to the bioeconomy sectors of the world, including agriculture and food systems, not only about renewable and non-renewable resources or plastics, as we often talk circular economy about. It really is a systems approach to the whole of economy, and what it means that when we are adopt this systems approach across different economic sectors at different levels, including it can be really more local, more regional. It will lead to, through making reuse as a standard, making recovery and recycling as a standard, making use of secondary raw materials use as a standard, and also making regenerative practices a standard. It will lead to reducing pollution, reducing climate and biodiversity impacts, and also shifting sectors to more proactively supporting climate and ecosystem resilience. So that's the way, that's the logic through which adopting circular approaches at different levels will help to support resilient approaches. Just to give you a bit of a scale of this, so there are studies from Ellen MacArthur Foundation and also others who work on circular economy showing that, for example, if you shift to circular practices in food systems, that could cut 50% of food system emissions by 2050. That's half of the food system emissions by 2050 at macro level. In the building sector, shifting to circular economy would reduce global carbon emissions from building materials almost 40% by 2050. And in terms of the plastics and plastics economy, again, shifting to circular economy in the plastic sector could reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 25% by 2040. So we are really talking about quite significant reduction of emissions and pressures, which again are really supportive of resilience in the larger scale. So that's circular economy, that's positioning circular economy as a climate, biodiversity and resilience measure approach. And then just to round things up, I'd like to share a couple of sectoral examples with which we have been working on at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. Not quite as practical level as we've heard previously in this panel, but something through the sectoral lens. And the first sectoral lens that we are currently working on is the lens of food systems and sustainable agriculture, which I think links quite nicely what Elena was saying in a panel earlier. So in 2021, we at Ellen MacArthur Foundation published one of our sectoral flagship reports that creates a vision for circular economy in food systems and agriculture. And that report concluded that if we apply circular and regenerative approach to how we design and produce food, we could deliver significant benefits to biodiversity and climate, and also at the farm level to the farmers themselves. So such circular approaches could reduce the farm level greenhouse gases emissions by 70%, while increasing the biodiversity at the farm level by 50%. And at the same time, the increase at the farm level outputs would be around 50%, and while increasing significantly also the income to farmers. And this would be true for practices that are considered or should be considered as part of circular economy in sustainable agriculture and food system context. And those 4 practices, which are very much the kind that support resilience in an ecosystem, include regenerative reproduction, using low impact ingredients, often local ingredients, diversifying the number of ingredients that go into the food portfolio and become the food portfolio of companies, and also upcycling products of the production, so creating new products through upcycling of material. And if you work with businesses to challenge them really, and that's what we do, challenge them to redesign their food portfolios from the beginning, to adopt these type of circular approaches from very design, that will help them to become part of the change that we'd like to see, and then also help to deliver circular economy in practice on the ground. So in a way, we're trying to work with businesses, those businesses that Elena also mentioned, and trying to challenge them to shift their approach to deliver something regenerative like this that will help to deliver better impacts on the ground working with the farmers. And then the second lens, more sectoral lens that I would just like to highlight, which is also where we at Ellen MacArthur Foundation have been working on recently, is the built environment. So there was another flagship report that we published this summer, which was about built environment and circular approaches in Europe. And the purpose of the report was to showcase and assess the benefits when you combine circular approaches to the building sector and also link that to nature positive approaches at the same time. And we got a lot of resilience and also more broader economic benefits from that approach and from that modeling. So when we looked at it through the climate resilience lens, the study showed that the loss and damage avoided to properties and businesses by using circular nature positive approaches amounted to several hundreds of billions of euros in the end. And it also resulted in decreasing the urban peak temperatures by several degrees as well, while also increasing jobs and delivering different kinds of economic benefits on the ground. And the good practice here really was to combine the nature-based solutions to the circular approaches to the building sector as an approach to increase climate resilience, climate adaptation moving forward. So I'm going to leave it at that. I don't have case studies to share here, but I would really encourage you to take a look at our website because that's a wealth of information, looking at this through also very concrete case study lenses that we've been collecting over the years. So that will give you different ideas from different places around the world as to what circular approaches could look like and how they can help to deliver resilience. But with that, given also the time at the moment, Sonia, I'm going to hand over back to you.
Well, thank you very much, Marianne. So Marianne is operations lead at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. Although she wasn't able to mention cases, Ellen MacArthur Foundation is actually quite a distinctive figure when it comes to discourses on circular economy. Even in the Philippines, we've been using their definition of CE in not only our local seminars or local exchanges, but also in terms of our policy documents. And right now, we have an ongoing discourse on a bill about CE. And that's a big step forward compared to traditional solid waste management initiatives and policy. So, Marianne, a question for you before we go to the open forum. Well, CE, as you mentioned earlier, really is encompassing. You have several levels of intervention, but I think the more practical exchange here would be us elevating solid waste management and eventually us designing excess materials out of our systems or us designing waste out of our systems. And that probably is a very big ask, not only in terms of governments, but also in terms of our partners within and outside government. So how do you make this discourse, this discussion more doable, given that breadth of concerns that we have, not only in terms of the conceptual grounding, but also in terms of us grounding everything among our stakeholders, may they be within government, within communities, or within the private sector? Marianne, please.
Yes, a very big question. I think you'll need to, or we'll need to work on the circular economy question on multiple fronts to make that happen. So the first front would be that I tried to do with my intervention, which was raising awareness still among ourselves as experts and future experts and perhaps future decision makers in governments as to what circular economy actually is more broadly, so that not only waste sector but also indeed the bioeconomy sectors and across the board, and what could it look like across those different sectors, and what could it look like in a built environment, what would it look like in food systems. So getting that understanding across different sectors, the circular economy, what it is and what it could look like. Then, obviously, I'm a policy expert, so I will absolutely going to say that we will need to be working on the policy side of things, because creating the enabling policy environment and also perhaps regulating policy environment that then pushes our players and incentivizes our players, i.e. the businesses, for example, to take up circular approaches. So, and I think we are making strides here. So many countries are now adopting the circular economy strategies. And within those, there will be actual concrete policy instruments and incentives. And then third one I'm going to mention is the innovation. So working together with businesses, as we do at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, to really spar and innovate, help businesses to innovate what circular models could look like in an enabling system, and also exploring how we will make the economics work for those circular approaches. So those three things I would share.
Thank you, Marianne. Unfortunately, I'm being flagged about our time constraint. But I think opening the floor for 3 questions would be also fair, given your attendance here. So please raise your questions. And we'll try to
Thank
answer
you.
everything briefly.
Excellent session. I wish I could ask 5 questions to 5 presenters, but since the time would not permit me, I'm just asking the question to Edward. You very nicely, you have shown that in DRC, how the local level governance can be ensured, but and then you showed the success story. But coming from a country, Bangladesh, where you know that there are many success stories of what the NGOs doing at the very local level. But I think the major challenge is when you have a macro level serious governance issues at the very local level, you have some success, but how do you really sustain it and how do you really upscale it? Now, what is your experience? Thank you.
Okay, 2 more questions, please, before I ask our panel to answer. Yes, please. So that's clashing governance from the national and local level perspectives.
Okay, can I?
After the lady, please.
Hello, I am Sangamitra. I am from Naka, Thailand. My question is to Ms. Lin. As you were explaining, there's some association where women are involved in the business, but they are not the decision maker because they are busy in some other work or household work, something. So in that way, how do you analysis the JC lens or the gender inclusion lens in those cases? Is it clear? Okay, thank you.
So gender participation. And last question, please.
Okay. Thank you. So my question also goes to Professor Edward. And thank you for the wonderful case studies you projected and the good work we are doing. I think one in DRC, the other one in the Amazon area. So talking about the large-scale forest conservation and also about the mangroves, as you rightly mentioned, it is not enough to advocate for people not to harvest the resources from the mangrove and then also from the forest. So there is also the need for alternative livelihoods. But even beyond that, there is also the need for innovative market instruments. And you mentioned about the bottom-up environmental finances. You listed some approaches, and I wanted to know if you have operationalized any of those financial models and what were the outcomes. And if not, what is the way forward? And also to Professor or Mr. Vivas, this bottom-up environmental financial, the bottom-up environmental financial approaches, how do we extend it to the coastal spaces? Looking at marine conservation, how do we introduce some of these beyond the case study you mentioned? How do we introduce some of these financial innovations to incentivize fisher folk to, for instance, to stop illegal fishing or any of these other environmental degradation issues? Thank you.
Thank you. So that's all about clashing priorities. So you have governance issues, gender-related lens, and then clashing priorities. If I may ask you guys, please limit your answers to 30 seconds each. Just to make JC happy. Okay, Jin, you can start, please.
So to limit my answer, so I want to invite everyone to attend the workshop number 6 on bridging the gap, engaging women and youth in climate policy tomorrow after lunch if you want to hear more about gender perspective. And shortly after that on workshop 9, I will be speaking again. So I will be applying the intersectionality-based policy analysis on designing vulnerability and resilience profile. But to answer your question very shortly. So we have overwhelming policies regarding inclusion of women in the household sector, but primarily my advocacy is incorporating it to the not the most radical one about the patriarchy, but slowly integrating women in the educational system and starting from the educational system, like breaking the barriers, like women are not just made for household work, but also they have opportunities to join the productive and community-based. And of course, we are now here. I am here speaking. So there are long progress from beforehand. So, but education is one advocacy for me to promote gender equality.
Thank you. 30 seconds. I don't know is the answer to the first question. But I think it's around what economists would call crowding in. So if you build good governance at any level, it encourages good governance. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy, just as bad governance is, you get a spiral the other way. So I think if you can do it at a more local level, it will filter up. And also the international order, which we know is under increasing pressure, has built some good governance and that pressure down from the international level. But it's a massive challenge. To the other question, we've been focused a lot on carbon just because that's where the money is, that's where the mature market is. But our approach is that it shouldn't really matter what you want to do. The kind of principles are the same. It's about integrity. It's about integrity of what the people are doing on the ground. And if you can demonstrate that integrity, then actually they should be able to request payment for any of the services they're providing, whether that's carbon, whether that's biodiversity, whether that's water, whether that's, you name it. It should be the same. And that's highly theoretical. And I'm not going to suggest that that's going to happen overnight or indeed at all. But I think the idea can then be harnessed to do more interesting things.
I ironically went to the upscaling. I think that's the big question, no, of how to upscale all these examples. And I think that it's not a sum, it is that you have to be working at different levels and at different platforms. If you don't deal with the political platform, no, you don't change anything, but also with the economic. And in the economic, it's very, very large in the sense of local, regional, national, global, international. So if you don't have like the different platforms, then you will be only like attaining some short scale. But also environmental, what does it mean conservation and for whom and by whom? And so all this dealing, I think that we have to be dealing all the time and coming again and again at the different levels and the different platforms. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Well, just to be fair, David, 30 seconds, and Marianne after.
Yes, I'll do quickly, but it's a very complicated question when you're dealing with blue finance. The first thing is when you're trying to attract finance, you have two type of group of projects or activities. One is sustainable use, the other is conservation. For sustainable use, obviously, if you are using any biological resource ecosystems, you need to ensure that there is obviously conservation elements within it, but it has to have an economic value and benefit for whoever is financing the activity, both in economic terms, but also on social and environmental. There are many sources of finance there for public, concessional, philanthropic, and private, but private is going to be obviously always stricter on the return rate, especially in capital terms. Now, you have the second group, which is conservation. And in conservation, there is more interest, obviously, but philanthropic entities. There could be some interest from the private finance and the public, but they will always require additionality and lock-in conservation areas or activities, meaning that if there is not a return in capital, there must be a clear return in environmental terms, meaning a conservation area, capacity to storage carbon, or creation of national and marine parks, but new additionality. So again, in one segment, sustainable use is capital against production. In the second is capital against natural capital, and you have to consider that. And there are many ways to do blended finance. There is a lot of interest in many governments, philanthropic entities, and in some banks to support small communities to ensure livelihoods, but usually there are requirements related to the organization and association of the producers. The less organized they are, the less attractive they become to finance. So create an association, creating cooperatives is essential to attract finance. If you do it in an atomized way, it's very difficult to get it. So the more organized is the community, the higher is the probability they will be having access to finance. And we can have a special session on that because that's a topic in itself. But thank you very much.
Thank you, David. And finally, Marianne, we don't have any time anymore, so please, 30 seconds.
Yes, I didn't have any question direct to me directly, so I guess just simply repeat my call. If circular economy and circular economy approaches aren't yet on your radar as a researcher or as a decision maker or future decision maker, please put them on your radar, because we will need to, they will come on your radar as well, because governments are adopting these, and businesses are as well. And we just need to really guide them to deliver for our triple planetary crisis in a way that is sustainable and also takes the local communities and the local knowledge and indigenous knowledge on board, which they can, but we just really have to use them as such.
Thank you, Marianne. So it's apparent that an hour and a half is not enough for us to look at policy, governance, and implementation. So thank you guys for bearing with us.